Oh.
41 minutes. That is how long the masked figure with the holstered firearm and the loaded backpack spent inside Nancy Guthrie's home in the Catalina foothills, while an 84-year-old woman's pacemaker was still transmitting a signal that would go silent before sunrise. 41 minutes. And then he was gone, and Nancy Guthrie has not been seen since. That was 50 days ago. No arrest, no named suspect, no confirmed break in this case that has been made public. But this week, 10 specific things converged that changed the direction of this investigation in ways the public has not been told. And when you lay them side by side, they do not point in 10 different directions. They point in one. They have always pointed in one. And that direction is local. Not a stranger passing through Arizona on an interstate at 2 in the morning. Not someone who flew into Tucson from another state, targeted an elderly woman and vanished. Someone who lives in this city. Someone who may have driven past the memorial growing outside Nancy Guthrie's home on their way to work this Monday morning and come back home Friday evening to a life that looks completely ordinary to everyone around them. The FBI, a former detective with decades of behavioral analysis experience, and the Guthrie family itself, in a statement the federal government approved word by word, are all now pointing at the same geography, the same behavioral profile, and the same devastating conclusion. The person who took Nancy Guthrie has been hiding in plain sight in Tucson for the past 50 days, and the evidence has been saying that from the very beginning. Let me take you back to the night it happened, because the sequence matters, and the details that emerged this week only make sense when you understand exactly what that evening looked like and how it ended. Saturday, January 31st, 2026. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, has dinner with her family at the home of her daughter Annie Guthrie and Annie's husband Tommaso Cioni, an AP biology teacher in Tucson. They eat together, they play card games, they laugh. It is the kind of evening Nancy has had hundreds of times in this neighborhood she has called home for 50 years. At approximately 9:45 p.m., Tommaso drives Nancy back to her house in the Catalina foothills. He drops her off, her garage door opens at 9:48, it closes at 9:50. She is inside. Tommaso Cioni is the last known person to see Nancy Guthrie. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has publicly cleared all family members as suspects. A vehicle belonging to Annie and Tommaso that was seized early in the investigation has been returned. What happens inside that house over the next several hours is where the timeline goes dark. Nancy was scheduled to watch a live stream of a church service the following morning, Sunday, February 1st. She did not appear. Her family became concerned. When they went to check on her, they found something that Savannah Guthrie described in her first interview since the disappearance, the one she gave this week to her Today Show co-host Hoda Kotb, that immediately told them something was wrong. The back doors to Nancy's home were propped open. Savannah told Kotb that in those first moments, she thought maybe her mother had some kind of medical episode in the night and that the paramedics had come because the back doors were propped open, and that didn't make any sense. But the paramedics had not come. Nancy was not at a hospital. Nancy was gone. Deputies arrived and began searching. The FBI expanded its involvement significantly, bringing in agents, analysts, digital forensics teams, and crisis negotiators from Quantico. And 10 days later, on February 10th, FBI Director Kash Patel released 4 black and white images and a short video from a doorbell camera on Nancy's front door. The images showed what the FBI called an armed individual, a man wearing a ski mask, a jacket, long pants, gloves, and a handgun holster, carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack, standing on Nancy Guthrie's front porch during the early morning hours of February 1st. The FBI described him as male, approximately 5'9" to 5'10", average build. And here is a detail that has not received the attention it deserves. Patel's release of those images actually surprised the investigators on the ground. A source told CNN that both local and federal investigators in Tucson had hoped to keep the doorbell footage confidential. It was released from Washington over the objections of the people running the investigation. That means whatever they chose to hold back alongside those images, they held back deliberately. They are sitting on information the public has not seen. Now to what the family said this week, because this is where the direction of the investigation becomes unmistakable. The Guthrie family broke weeks of near silence with a carefully constructed written statement released through KVOA, Tucson's local NBC affiliate. And in an active federal kidnapping investigation at day 50, a statement like that does not simply express grief. It carries operational messages. Every word has been reviewed. Every phrase has been weighed. Nothing gets released without federal sign-off. The FBI approved this language before the public saw a single word of it. Brian Entin, News Nation's senior investigative reporter who has been on the ground in Tucson since nearly the first days of this investigation, analyzed that statement publicly and said it directly.
Nothing in it is accidental. And the words that stopped every investigative reporter and every law enforcement analyst covering this case were these: we continue to believe it is Tucsonans and the greater southern Arizona community that hold the key to finding resolution in this case. Someone knows something. It is possible a member of this community has information that they do not even realize is significant. Tucsonans. That is a specific word, not the general public, not a national audience. Tucsonans. People who live in that city, people who know those streets from regular daily experience, people who could have driven past Nancy Guthrie's house on a routine basis without anyone questioning their presence because they belong in that geography. They are part of the visual landscape of that neighborhood. They are not anomalies. They are regulars. Entin has been hearing this from law enforcement sources since the early weeks. The belief inside the Joint Task Force is that whoever did this is local, is from the Tucson area, and could potentially be from that specific neighborhood or immediately surrounding streets. That belief has been a quiet but persistent current running through the investigative thinking from the very beginning. And now, for the first time at day 50, the family is saying it publicly in a statement that has the FBI's fingerprints all over its construction. The statement also named the late evening of January 11th, a specific date and time that had never appeared in any previous family communication. That is not a routine update. That is a deliberate operational signal sent to a deliberate audience with a specific date they want people to think about and check their cameras for. And it connects directly to something named publicly for the first time this week. Former detective and state trooper Morgan Wright, CEO and founder of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases, former technical advisor to America's Most Wanted with 18 years in state and local law enforcement, sat down with Brian Entin on Brian Entin Investigates and described Nancy Guthrie's abductor using a specific term from criminal behavioral analysis: a marauder. That is not casual language. In behavioral profiling, a marauder is a defined category of offender. A marauder operates from a fixed home base, ranges out to commit the offense, and returns. They live close enough to their target to come and go with ease, close enough to abort a plan if conditions are wrong and return the following week, close enough to observe over an extended period and develop the operational knowledge this crime required. Wright named a direction. Based on the suspect's dress, his need to move quickly after the abduction, and the geography, Wright assessed the base of operations was likely towards South Tucson. The mountains to the north make that direction impractical. The accessible routes point south. Wright also described the Catalina Foothills road layout as the equivalent of taking a bowl of spaghetti and turning it upside down. No grid, no logic. You either need a navigation app or you have to have knowledge of that area. And Wright believes there was at least one other person involved. The tradecraft, the logistics, the mechanisms of control point to more than one individual. Someone who moved through those winding streets at 2 a.m. without hesitation has driven those roads many times. And they may not have been alone. Now, look at the dates investigators have flagged. January 11th, January 24th, February 1st. 3 dates, 3 confirmed or probable visits to Nancy's property. The family statement named January 11th for the first time. NBC News reported neighbors told them investigators asked about footage from specific dates, primarily the weekend Nancy disappeared, January 11th and January 24th. Enton sources say the doorbell photographs showing the suspect without a backpack, visually distinct from the February 1st images where he arrives fully equipped, may be from January 11th. 4 networks, ABC, NBC, Fox, and News Nation, drawing on 4 separate law enforcement sources, confirmed the photographs come from different dates, representing different visits. The sheriff pushed back publicly, but sources inside the investigation hold firm. Now, look at the days of the week. January 11th is a Sunday. January 24th is a Saturday. February 1st begins in the early morning hours of a Sunday. Every flagged date falls on a weekend. Not a Tuesday, not a Thursday morning. Weekends. Every time. That is not coincidence. That is a pattern. And patterns in criminal behavior are not random. They reflect the constraints and the structure of the person's regular life. Someone who operates only on weekends has their weekdays accounted for. Someone with a Monday through Friday job. Someone with a schedule and an obligation that keeps them in one place 5 days a week and gives them Saturdays and Sundays to do something else. Someone who can drive to the Catalina foothills on a Saturday evening, assess conditions, decide the timing is not right, and drive home without it costing anything significant. Someone who can come back the following weekend and the weekend after that until conditions are exactly what they need. Someone who can abort on January 11th, arriving without a backpack, studying the camera position, assessing the entrance, deciding it is not right, and then return 3 weeks later on February 1st, completely transformed, mask properly fitted, firearm holstered, backpack fully loaded with whatever equipment required 41 minutes to use inside that house. 2 visits, 2 completely different operational profiles. The gap between them is the time this person spent going home, sitting with what they observed, acquiring or organizing what they needed, and deciding when to come back. Someone who can abort and return does not have far to travel. Someone for whom that neighborhood is not a destination, but part of their accessible geography. That is not a drifter. It is not a transient. It is not someone from another state. It is a person embedded in the daily rhythm of Tucson. Someone who may have watched the news coverage from a television in a house a few miles south. Someone who may be going to work Monday mornings in this city and coming home Friday evenings to a life that looks completely ordinary to everyone around them.
Wright named the direction, and the geography confirms it. South Tucson. The mountains wall off the north. Anyone trying to move quickly after this crime is heading south, into the flatter street grid where driving is fast and anonymous. If the suspect's base is in or around South Tucson, the drive to Nancy's house is 20 minutes. That distance makes multiple reconnaissance visits over multiple weekends easy. You can drive 20 minutes on a Saturday evening, assess a target, decide conditions are wrong, and drive 20 minutes home. You can do that every weekend for a month, and nobody in your life notices. That is the geography of a marauder. Now layer that on top of what the FBI has confirmed in the immediate neighborhood. The FBI is examining a vacant house adjacent to Nancy's home as a potential staging location. Retired Pima County SWAT commander Bob Kyrie told Parade magazine a vacant property there could serve as a surveillance base, providing a cover story for being in the neighborhood at varying hours across multiple weeks. It gives a physical location from which to observe Nancy's daily patterns, which nights her lights went out early, which nights her driveway was empty, which nights she was completely and verifiably alone inside that house. Kyrie said it could also house concealed surveillance equipment inside the structure itself, positioned to monitor activity on the street without any visible footprint. No car at the curb, no figure in a yard, just a dark house that nobody thought twice about. Nancy's neighbor of 30 years, Aldine Meister, told investigators on record that the neighbors on the other side of her moved out before Nancy disappeared, and she wanted them to check that house. The FBI went back. The Sheriff's Department confirmed to Fox News Digital on March 20th they are evaluating suspicious activity connected to that property, and a neighbor who moved out before the disappearance has been seen returning afterward.
Think about what that means in practical terms. Someone with access to a vacant house next door to Nancy's property could have spent weeks building an extraordinarily detailed picture of her daily life from a position that was physically a few feet away, with zero visible presence on that street. At the same time, the FBI is requesting the name of every contractor and worker on construction sites in that neighborhood during the weeks before February 1st. Not general company inquiries, specific names. Every individual person who had a physical presence on those work sites during the relevant window. Former FBI agent Steve Moore addressed this directly, and his reasoning is worth understanding in full. The theory that has driven significant investigative thinking from the beginning is that this crime was targeted, and Sheriff Nanos himself confirmed that to NBC News, saying, "We believe we know why he did this, and we believe that it was targeted." Someone with daily, legal, unremarkable access to that specific street during January had something almost impossible to create from a distance. Think carefully about what daily construction access to a residential street provides. You arrive every morning in a work truck with tools. You are expected to be there. Neighbors see you regularly enough that you become part of the visual background. Nobody calls law enforcement about a work crew. Nobody approaches someone in work clothes and a hard hat and demands to know what they are doing there. You can stand on that block and observe which car is in which driveway at which hour. You can time how long it takes a resident to walk from their garage to their front door. You can identify where the security cameras are mounted and whether they appear to be actively recording. You can note which houses have dogs, which houses have visitors on certain evenings, which houses go dark early. Over weeks of daily legal presence, someone with a surveillance objective could build the operational picture this crime required. And here is the critical connection that ties the construction angle to everything else. CBS News reported that additional footage was recovered from other cameras on Nancy's property, a fence camera covering the back and a driveway camera showing the garage. Those images captured family members, landscapers, pool workers going back weeks before the kidnapping. Nothing was deemed suspicious, and the suspect captured on the front door camera does not appear in any of that additional footage. He only appears on the front door camera. That means whoever approached that house on February 1st knew which angles to avoid. That is not luck. That is the product of extended surveillance. That is someone who knew exactly where every camera was pointed before they ever put on the mask. The FBI wants every name from those sites. And I can break a little news here that I spoke with a detective earlier today, and effective Monday, this investigation moves to the task force entirely. Resources are consolidating. The search is narrowing from broad to targeted.
Now to the DNA. Foreign DNA was recovered inside Nancy's home, not connected to her or anyone with authorized access. A complex mixed profile, more than one contributor, being processed at a private laboratory in Florida. The gloves found 2 miles from her home, which generated significant public attention early in the investigation, were traced to an unrelated restaurant employee who works near Nancy's home. Other gloves are still being tested. Forensic genetic genealogy has been formally initiated on the DNA from inside the house. This is the same methodology that identified Brian Kohberger in the University of Idaho murders and Joseph James D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, after more than 4 decades. It takes an unknown profile and builds a family tree outward from partial matches with relatives who submitted genetic material to consumer platforms like GED Match, 23andMe, or Ancestry. It does not require the suspect to exist in any law enforcement database. It does not require them to have ever been arrested. It requires one connection, one distant cousin, one family member anywhere in this country who at any point spit into a tube and mailed it to a genealogy company. And from that single connection, the tree builds outward, narrowing generation by generation until investigators reach a cluster small enough to cross-reference against geography, age, and access. Forensic expert April Stonehouse confirmed processing is moving rapidly. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer said the case is red hot behind the scenes, that the FBI is drinking from a fire hose with more investigative leads than most cases ever have. And the local angle adds something to the forensic picture that has not been connected publicly. If the abductor is from Tucson, their DNA may exist, not just from the night of the abduction, but on surfaces touched during weeks of surveillance, a gate latch, a doorstep, the vandalized utility box investigators flagged.
Every name from those construction rosters is a potential comparison point. Every former resident is a potential match. In 2026, the probability that anyone has 0 relatives in a consumer database approaches 0. The tree will build. The question is only how long it takes. And this week, Sheriff Chris Nano said on Bill Buckmaster's radio show, "Yes, I know a lot, but I am not going to share that with the public." He knows something. The FBI knows something. The DNA processing may be what converts that knowledge into courtroom-ready evidence. Now, there is one section of the family statement that did not make the headlines, but is arguably the most significant thing the family has said in 50 days. They wrote that they want to celebrate Nancy's beautiful and courageous life, but cannot do that until she is brought to a final place of rest. Read that phrase again carefully. A final place of rest. Not until she comes home, not until she walks back through the door of the house she has lived in for 50 years. A final place of rest. That is a family that has been living with the full weight of what the evidence and the passage of time are telling them. A family that loves their mother completely and is also beginning to prepare gently and with evident heartbreak for every possibility that 50 days without proof of life may represent. And then they wrote, "We cannot grieve, we can only ache and wonder." Those words were approved by the FBI. They were chosen deliberately, and they describe exactly what it looks like to be 50 days into the disappearance of an 84-year-old woman who requires daily cardiac medication, who has a pacemaker that went silent on February 1st, and from whom no credible proof of life has emerged. Think about the arc this family has traveled. In the first days, there was hope and willingness to negotiate. Savannah and her siblings released a video directly addressing whoever had their mother. "We received your message and we understand. This is very valuable to us and we will pay." On February 24th, the family offered a $1 million reward and at the same time donated $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Over 1,500 tips poured into the FBI after the reward was announced. And then this week, Savannah Guthrie sat down with Hoda Kotb for her first interview since the disappearance. "We are in agony," she said. "We are in agony. It is unbearable. And to think of what she went through. I wake up every night in the middle of the night, every night, and in the darkness I imagine her terror, and it is unthinkable, but those thoughts demand to be thought." And then she said this, "It's too much to bear to think that I brought this to her bedside, that it's because of me, and I just want to say, I'm so sorry, Mommy. I'm so sorry." Annie, Nancy's daughter the poet, wept audibly at the memorial outside her mother's home. She and Tommaso and Savannah were seen laying yellow flowers there on March 2nd. Cameron, Nancy's son, a retired military colonel, spoke directly on camera to whoever took their mother. "We want to talk to you, and we are waiting for contact." The community of Tucson responded. Yellow ribbons appeared on mailboxes, on trees, on cacti across the city. At NBC's Studio 1A, the Today Show hosts wore yellow ribbon pins and filled the set with yellow roses. Hoda Kotb said on camera, "We have yellow roses around Studio 1A, and we are all wearing ribbons as we send our love to Savannah and her family." Nancy Ellen Guthrie was born in Fort Wright, Kentucky in 1942. She married a mining engineer named Charles Guthrie and lost him to a heart attack at 49 while he was on an exploration project in Mexico in 1988. She was 48 years old when she became a widow and a single mother to 3 children. She took a job as a clerk in the Public Affairs Department at the University of Arizona so her kids could attend college with tuition benefits. She raised Savannah, Annie, and Cameron on modest means in the Catalina foothills for 50 years. She is described by everyone who knows her as mentally sharp, independent, deeply rooted in her community, a regular churchgoer, a woman who built a life of quiet dignity. She had dinner with her family on a Saturday evening, played card games, laughed, and her son-in-law dropped her off at 9:50. The garage door closed behind her. She trusted the world around her completely. She deserved to go home safely that night. She deserves to come home now. And somebody in Tucson knows what happened during those 41 minutes. The Guthrie family pointed directly at the Tucson community in a statement the FBI approved word by word. A former detective with decades of behavioral analysis named South Tucson as the likely base of operations and classified the suspect as a marauder operating from a fixed local base who did not act alone.
A vacant house immediately adjacent to Nancy's property is being investigated as a staging location for extended pre-abduction surveillance. A neighbor who moved out of that street kept coming back after the disappearance. The FBI is requesting the name of every construction worker who set foot in that neighborhood during January. The doorbell camera captured at least 2 visits on different dates with 2 completely different operational profiles. The suspect does not appear on any of the other surveillance cameras recovered from the property, meaning he knew which angles to avoid. Every single date investigators have flagged falls on a weekend. The DNA is in active processing at a private laboratory in Florida. Forensic genetic genealogy has been formally initiated. The investigation is consolidating into the Joint Task Force entirely as of this coming Monday. Sheriff Chris Nanos said publicly this week that he knows a lot but cannot share it. He also warned the public, don't think for a minute that because it happened to the Guthrie family, you're safe. And forensic behavioral expert Brant Smith told Fox News Digital that suspects in cases like this frequently return to the scene, that this person could have stood among the mourners at Nancy's memorial, could have watched the vigils from within the crowd, could have taken photographs from a position of apparent normality. Brian Enton stated on the record that the suspect may have already been seen in footage from public events at Nancy's home. Investigators have been watching every person who visited that memorial, every single person. This case is not cold. It is not stalled. It is narrowing methodically toward one geographic area, one neighborhood, and one person sustaining the ordinary appearance of a normal daily life while carrying the full weight of what they did on February 1st. If you are in Tucson tonight and you know someone whose behavior changed in the days or weeks around February 1st, make the call. If you noticed a vehicle on your street on the evening of January 11th or January 24th that had no obvious reason to be there, make the call. If you worked construction in the Catalina foothills area during January or early February and saw something during those weeks that did not sit right with you at the time, make the call. If you know someone who suddenly seemed different after the news of Nancy's disappearance broke, if you attended that memorial and noticed someone who seemed out of place, if you have been carrying something for 50 days that you were not sure mattered, it matters. Contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI, that is 1-800-225-5324. You can submit a TUP online at tips.fbi.gov or contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900 or 88-CRIME through Tucson Crime Stoppers. Everything is completely anonymous, no ID required. The reward is over $1.2 million, including $1 million from the Guthrie family and $100,000 from the FBI. Cash at a neutral location. Sometimes the right person hears the right story at exactly the right moment, and that one person, that one call, could be the thing that brings Nancy home. 50 days, one family in agony, one city that holds the answer, and an investigation that is closer tonight than it has ever been to the name at the end of that genealogy tree. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home.